The subcommittee meets today to receive testimony on Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force combat aircraft programs. I would like to thank our witnesses for being here today. They are Vice Admiral Mark Skinner, Principal Military Deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition; Lieutenant General Terry Roebling, Marine Corps, Deputy Commandant of Marine Corps for Aviation; Floyd, Navy, Director of the Air Warfare Division of the U.S. Navy; Lieutenant General Herbert J. Carlisle, U.S. Air Force, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations Plans and Requirements; Major John Lindell, Air Force, Director of Global Power Programs, Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition. This we are holding for the purpose of on the budget request for FY12. The potential impact of the Budget Control Act of 2011 on our military capability is a major concern of this subcommittee. Today we will address combat aviation programs to hear from our witnesses about potential impacts of budget decisions on our deterrence and combat capability. It would be better had the Department of Defense provided the services an updated national military strategy and a projection of resources likely to be available so the services could better plan their programs. Absent this, hearings such as this might be described as an exercise in futility because we do not know what the national strategy is. We have no idea how much money we will have to prosecute that strategy. Therefore, major reductions in the federal budget need to be a major element of correcting the federal deficit. The Department must share in a fair and balanced way in those reductions, and that process is already taking place under the Budget Control Act of 2011, with nearly $500 billion in cuts planned for DoD over the next 10 years. Under the sequestration provisions of the Budget Control Act, further cuts up to a total of $1 trillion could be possible under what Secretary Panetta has called the doomsday mechanism. Indeed, the Air Force statement for this hearing warns that reductions imposed by the implementation of sequestration rules would have a significant adverse impact on the ability of the United States Air Force to perform to which it is presently assigned. We have much to cover today, but a major issue is the strike fighter aviation in the Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force. Much of strike fighter aviation hinges on the development and production of the F-35. The F-35 program, based on the current revised schedule, is ahead of the number of flight test hours and achievements of test points for the F-35C, planned for calendar year 2011. The F-35B is slightly behind those benchmarks thus far. However, the F-35B recently completed its initial development sea trials aboard the USS Wasp, which reportedly went quite well. But the F-35 continues to experience additional costs from the elements of concurrent development and production activities. And we continue to feel both the financial effects and the operational effects of this concurrent program. Projecting the costs related to concurrency have proved challenging. April for fiscal year 2011 FY35 aircraft procurement. The contract for those aircraft has not been completed between the government and the contractor. We understand that one of the major reasons for there not yet being a signed contract for fiscal year 2011 is the inability for the government and the contractor to agree on what the concurrency costs are likely to be, whether these costs should be shared, and if shared, how should they be shared. F-35 aircraft was appropriated for fiscal year 2011, but we understand the department is likely to procure only 30 aircraft because some funds will be required to pay for cost overruns in the first 3 production lots and to potentially pay for concurrency modifications expected for the fiscal year 2011 aircraft. 4 of the first operational F-35A aircraft were recently delivered to Eglin Air Force Base. We understand that there is some disagreement within the Department of Defense on whether the operational F-35A aircraft at Eglin Air Force Base to begin an operational utility evaluation that 35A to begin a training program beyond an initial cadre of operational pilots. We understand that this evaluation had been scheduled. Concerns. Others say those concerns have been addressed. We hope our Air Force witnesses today can help us understand whether plans to begin the F-35 operational utility evaluation. At our National Guard and Reserve Component hearing on October 12th, General Wyatt, the Director of the Air Force, testified that he had not yet received a plan for recapitalizing the Air National Guard's fighter fleet, which is of particular concern to those units conducting aerospace control alert missions. As a result, Mr. Lobiondo and I formally requested that the Secretary of the Air Force provide both the committee and General Wyatt with a comprehensive plan before the end of this year for modernizing the Air National Guard's aerospace control alert mission fleet and we hope our witnesses can provide us with an update on the progress of that effort today. Before we begin, let me call on the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Reyes, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining here. Today, aviation programs occur major strategic decisions that could greatly impact aircraft programs. Among those decisions are how much we are willing to invest in maintaining our current dominance in the air. No other nation in the world can match us today in terms of our capability to project air power, so most don't even try. For example, in Afghanistan today, U.S. commanders get close air support aircraft cover over any target in less than 15 minutes. That remarkable capability doesn't just happen. It requires an array of tanker aircraft, combat search and rescue, communications, and other systems all working in concert. The United States also fields hundreds of unmanned systems that didn't exist back in 2001. The intelligence provided by those platforms has become an essential part of almost all ground operations in Afghanistan. However, this dominance is not permanent. China, Russia, and other nations are developing systems to challenge our current dominance, and in a future conflict, we may not be able to operate like we can today in Afghanistan. So the Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps face the challenge of maintaining today's forces in combat while also laying the groundwork for the future. In the area of air power, finding this balance can be extremely difficult because it takes many years to design, to field, and to learn how to operate new aircraft. This hearing will also cover DoD's largest single acquisition program, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, as the Chairman mentioned. Based on testimony, budget documents, and reports received by this committee, it is clear that the program is facing significant development challenges. However, despite the program's challenges, I want to go on record as saying I support it. I support the program because in the future, there is a very good chance that our military will have to overcome sophisticated air defense systems, and the only way to do that is with a combination of fifth-generation stealth aircraft and other advanced systems. If we walk away from the F-35 program, we simply won't be able to project power in many areas of the world in the future. To me, that possibility is not acceptable, so I think it is critical that we find a way forward with the F-35 that gets us what we need, which is an affordable fifth-generation aircraft that we can procure in large numbers. That might require changing the program to some degree, but the program has to move forward because the threat to continue American dominance in the air is real and it is growing. So I look forward to today's hearing and hearing the testimony of our witnesses. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Without objection, all witnesses' prepared statements will be included in the hearing record. Admiral Skinner, please proceed with your opening remarks, and you'll be followed by General Roebling, Admiral Floyd, and General Lindell.
Chairman Bartlett and Ranking Member Reyes, distinguished members of the committee, it is our honor to appear before you today to discuss the Department of the Navy's aviation procurement programs. My oral remarks will be for myself, Lieutenant General Roebling, and Rear Admiral Floyd. Testifying today, as we did on March 15th, are my colleagues, and with the permission of the committee, I propose to keep our combined Navy and Marine Corps oral remarks brief and submit our combined statement for the record. Following our remarks, General Carlisle will provide opening remarks for the Air Force. For the past 100 years, naval aviation has combined innovation, commitment, and courage to build a versatile and formidable force, providing this nation's global presence from the sea and from the air. The President's fiscal year 2012 budget requests funds to develop, procure, and sustain naval aviation to meet an ever-changing and complex threat. Many of our existing legacy aircraft and tactical systems are nearing the end of their service life or will not meet tomorrow's threat. We also recognize our nation is in the midst of a financial crisis, and we are committed to working more efficiently and cost-effectively in this budget-constrained environment. All areas of the budget are being reviewed, and as the Secretary of Defense has stated, nothing is off the table. We firmly believe reductions must be implemented thoughtfully, strategically, and ever mindful of the lessons of the past. We must not sacrifice the development of advanced technologies and capabilities, procurement of aircraft and integrated systems, and sustainment of the fleet. We will meet our nation's budget challenges by integrating better buying power initiatives and should-cost parameters early in a program's development, where trade-offs can make the most difference in life cycle cost, and changing contract structure and types, ensuring we get the most product for the warfighter. We are targeting affordability in development, procurement, and sustainment. We will ensure that over the next 100 years we'll be as successful as we have been in the past and remain committed to maintaining our Navy as the world's preeminent maritime force. It is our privilege today to testify before you, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Our hearing room is not equipped with the world's best microphones, so for best results, if you will hold it very directly into it, General Robling.
Sir, Vice Admiral Skinner's remarks as a commander. I think we can go on to the Air Force.
General Carter.
Distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on Air Force's tactical, rotary wing, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aviation programs. I'm joined by my friend Major General Jay Lindell, the Director of Global Power Programs for the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisitions. And with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to take a moment to recognize this true patriot, Jay Lindell, who is retiring later this month after 33.5 years of dedicated service to our country. Since July 1st, the first day Jay and I actually met each other as freshmen at the U.S. Air Force Academy, it has been my distinct honor and privilege to serve beside this great American. Thanks, Jay. Opportunity. Today, globe support the fight while simultaneously maintaining our homeland presence in support of Operation Noble Eagle. I could not be prouder of the work our airmen are doing. Just last week, I presented the Air Force Cross to a combat controller, Staff Sergeant Robert Gutierrez. Although critically wounded, Sergeant Gutierrez continued to direct multiple strafing runs that resulted in the elimination of a high-value target and no American casualties. His story captures the effect air power can bring to the fight. When dedication and courage are paired with technology, there is no limit to what we can achieve. This and how our technical prowess can be leveraged against a potential enemy. It is imperative through our modernization and acquisition programs. We look forward and satisfy these requirements in an incredibly fiscally constrained environment to support this great nation. Major General Lindell and I thank the subcommittee for allowing us to appear today and for your continued support to our airmen, their families, and our entire United States military. We look forward to answering your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for being here. As usual habit, I will reserve my questions till last, hoping that they will have all been asked by other members of our subcommittee. Mr. Reyes.
Thank you for your testimony. I guess I'll start off by asking a very basic, fundamental question, but very important question, because most of us on this committee are very concerned that if the Committee of 12 does not come to some agreement that gives us an opportunity to vote, then automatically sequestration will take place. So if I can ask each one of you to paint if in fact we don't get an agreement and we have to go to that sequestration process. And remember, we want to know exactly what areas and what programs and what capabilities are going to be impacted by that across-the-board cut?
Well, sir, I'll lead off. Sequestration, as we understand it, would result in $500 to $600 billion of additional cuts to the Department of Defense budget. Certainly, from an acquisition perspective, and the way that the cuts would be implemented across our multiple accounts, it would be difficult to maintain certain of our acquisition programs. So we're looking at those contingencies now. As I mentioned in my opening statement, all of our programs are on the table to take a look at that. We know, though, from just a general nature that certainly we would have changes in our major acquisition programs, perhaps layoffs in our civilian workforce, and our industrial base would feel the impact of that. We would have contractual implications, perhaps breaking multi-year contracts and things of that nature. So sequestration from an acquisition perspective, at least for the Department of the Navy, would have serious consequences.
What consequences would it create for the Navy? For instance, in terms of being able to deploy, keep a presence in all the different strategic parts of the globe.
Well, from an operational perspective, certainly as we took cuts across our readiness accounts and our sustainability accounts, that would have an impact on how we deploy. But until we got the idea of how much those cuts would be, and then take a look at some of our contingency plans, to give you specifics would be difficult. At this point in time, it's pre-decisional until we put the budget together and present it here to the Hill in February. But with the defense cuts that we've taken to date, the cuts imposed by sequestration would have an impact on our budget.
Ranking Member Reyes, thank you for that question. All of the folks have a similar answer because we've been going through for the last 6 to 8 months on the current budget problem that we're facing, and the chairman said $500 billion. I can tell you $500 billion for DoD. While we understand that that's a part of what we need to do for our nation, take those cuts is very difficult. It's painful. The Commandant of the Marine Corps, his own Force Service Review Group, Structure Review Group, he decided on a middleweight force that would be 186,800. That included 24 battalions, 21 active duty squadrons, 3 reserve squadrons, 16 vertical lift squadrons, 8 heavy lift squadrons, and 8 HMLA squadrons. Along with, as you know, the EFE was canceled, and we're looking at a replacement for that at the ACV. So when you talk about sequestration, going well below or past those $500 billion cuts, start not only cut capacity, but it also cuts into capabilities. And I think Marine Corps, both ends of the spectrum, both the high, even though we're the middleweight force, we play in the high end of the spectrum, and some of the op plans out in the Pacific Asia area, and of course out in the Middle East right now, and then of course the low end where we do security cooperation and coin operations and those kind of things. So I think for the Marine Corps, it'll be a widely different Marine Corps than you have right now.
I add seniors' comments that they just made. And I know it's difficult to be specific, not knowing exactly what the numbers come to be. But we know that it's going to be a significant impact across the board in amount of presence in our force structure, in our readiness, our training, shore infrastructure, travel, all to personnel, which will be major impacts. So I think that would be kind of my thoughts on it based on what we've already heard.
Ranking Member Reyes, thanks for the question. Again, as my good friend Terry Roebling said, we'll all probably pretty much say the same thing. We're still struggling with the current cut, the $450 billion cut that was laid in as part of the top line of DOD. We haven't got there yet, and it's incredibly challenging to get to that level. To think of something that would be a next level above that at even a greater reduction, the specifics would be draconian in our opinion. Our chief will tell you, when you look at the range of military operations that we all participate in, by definition, the $450 million cut, we'll be able to do a lot less of that. Our capacity across the United States military will go down with the current budget that we're trying to struggle with for 13. The comment that our chief and secretary make often is, if you think of last March when we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, we're doing a swap out of some pretty big combat power there. At the same time, we're supporting our Japan neighbors with their earthquake and tsunami, and we'd started operations in Libya. It's entirely possible when all this budget goes into effect, we couldn't do that again. If that happened in 2015, we probably couldn't do what we did this past March. If we the question that we are struggling with within the Air Force is, what are we going to stop doing? What of that range of military operations? Because if we take capacity down across the board, eventually none of it will be effective. We'll get to such a small capacity that we can't really accomplish the missions that we're given. So we would have to pick mission areas and stop doing them. You've also heard our chief talk about, if we got to that point, we'd have to take entire fleet, a bunch of different types. We'd have to take potentially an entire fleet down. So when we think about sequestration, we think about things that would be asked of us in the future that we'd no longer be able to do.
Ranking Member Reyes, if I could just restate what Secretary Donnelly has commented, that we'll definitely be a less capable, less modernized, undermanned, and hollow force. And a hollow Carlisle and I started flying jets in our Air Force, and we entered at the same time, as he commented, in 1980, when we squadron, there was a 50% chance when we stepped to our jets that we would get in the air. And that was due to lack of parts, lack of engines, lack of ability to maintain the aircraft. So when we start talking about this sort of cuts that we've all commented on, and potentially a hollow force, we're talking about a much less capable Air Force.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen, for that candid assessment. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Lobiondo.
And I'd like to start off by echoing what my colleagues have said and thanking you for your many years of service to our nation and your leadership that you've provided. Generals Carl Lindell, as Chairman Bartlett indicated, he and I sent a letter to Secretary Donnelly last week outlining our concern for the lack of a formal plan to recapitalize the Air National Guard's Aerospace Control Alert mission fighter jet fleet. It's an issue we've been talking about for years and years and years, and we're trying to zero in on this for what we think is the sake of the nation. With that said, Secretary Donnelly present this subject and General Wyatt with a hard, not a promise that there is a plan, but something that we can actually look at and something that we can actually read to address this issue by the end of the year. I'm hoping and assuming that this issue is being discussed, and if that's so, is it possible to give us some insight into what we can expect to see in this plan with respect to the number of ACA units in the Air National Guard? And should the Air National Guard expect to have to maintain, how do they do years? I'll start with those two. I've got a series of follow-up questions. I'll see how my timing goes.
I understand exactly what you're talking about. We very recently had a very in-depth work with in a fairly high-level meeting that was just this past week with the Secretary, the Chief, the Director of National Guard. The director of the National Guard Bureau, General McKinley, was there. General Stenner was there. And that is exactly the point we got to, and that is how we're going to modernize and across the National Guard as well as the Air Force Reserve, how we're going to maintain that capability as the reserve fleet for the United States Air Force. Too distant future, the announcement of the plans of probably close to a 350 airplane service life extension program for the F-16 fleet, as well as a modernization program for the F-16 fleet. As you well know, in the 12 budget, there is money to do a service life extension program to start the RDT&E and buy the first 3 ship sets, and also do start doing the RDT&E on the avionics upgrades to these airplanes as well. So that plan is, in fact, as you had asked for, sir, is being worked very diligently, and how those, based on what we believe, we'll have the other thing that is will aid this is the integrated master schedule for the F-35 program will be out fairly shortly, combining the F-35 with the SLEP of the F-16s and how we're going to integrate the F-35 into the Guard and Reserve, as well as how we're going to modernize the legacy fleet of the F-16s. So the answer is yes, sir, we will.
Okay.
And currently we do, as you well know, again, there's 18 ACA sites and 17 of them are Air National Guard, and that is the plan that we're taking forward.
The preliminary options that may be on the table are extremely important for newer upgraded iron into these strategic wings, obviously like the 177th that I represent. And beyond the latest service life extension program, there's questions about how far we can go with that, what we can do with that, the modification Guard entire jet inventory. There are a lot of moving parts here which we have no understanding of how it comes together to present us with a comprehensive plan, and that's the anxiety that I'm feeling here.
And so there are a lot of moving parts, which, as you just stated, incredibly difficult to get to the specifics, but we are working towards that to get that plan laid out. We are doing a full-scale fatigue test on the F-16 to determine those SLEP parts and what the life availability is in those airplanes, and the avionics upgrade as well. Okay. And the F-35 program and what that integrated master schedule looks like will be a big part of that, as well as some of those airplanes clearly are going to go to the Air National Guard. And they're going to Burlington already as announced, well, and there'll be more as well.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll have additional questions on the next round, but that's part of what worries me, because the F-35 continues to slide to the right. We continue to figure them in and what the Air National Guard is going to be able to do, and I think it might be a little bit of a false hope that we're going to get to any of those numbers that will make a difference unless you all can present something that makes some sense. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and I'll look forward to the next round.
Thank you, Mr. Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for testifying and for your service to our great nation. I have a sort of an in-the-weeds question for you, General Carlisle and General Lindell. I read or saw where you're going to be retiring UEs that serve combat search and rescue and programs, and that you're moving into more of a heavy platform to do combat search and rescue and a commercial off-the-shelf for the more domestic. Now, is this a change in direction that you're going from one platform to two, and what is the plan going forward? I don't truthfully understand.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for the question, sir. There's 2 airplanes now. The HH-60 does the combat search and rescue, and the Huey does the domestic in support of the nuclear fields as well as here. We ops loss replacement for the HH-60s that we've lost in combat to get that fleet at least to be able to sustain until we get a new combat search and rescue. There is a program for a new combat search and rescue airplane, and there's also a full and open competition of a commercial off-the-shelf airplane for the domestic mission to include the nuclear field as well as here at Andrews. So there are 2 programs, okay. And there's 2 airplanes today. whoever the bids will allow people to bid for either one of them or both of them together. So we're going to design the program and give them that flexibility if we can.
Okay, thank you. It was my misunderstanding then. Going to what Mr. Lobiondo started into was Joint Strike Fighter moving to the right. Now, obviously, delays in Joint Strike Fighter development are going to mean that you're going to have to keep legacy aircraft on board longer or in use longer. Now, I was just down at, and I'm going to butcher the name. I say Beaufort. Is it Beaufort? Beaufort, General Roebling?
It's Beaufort.
Beaufort. Okay, and I saw where a new hangar was being built for the F-35, and they're talking about the F-18s being retired. Can you all sort of tell me, one of the things that concerns me is I see that the Navy's got a strike fighter shortfall projected at 52 aircraft at 2019. So I'm curious as to how the legacy aircraft, the delay in development of the Joint Strike Fighter is going to impact not only current, but over these next 10 years. So anyone and everyone who wants to answer.
Okay, sir, I'll take the first shot at that since you mentioned Beaufort. That particular hangar will be done for fiscal year 14. Our plan eventually is to move the training squadron there into Beaufort. Right now, the way the program is slipped, we're looking at somewhere around a 2-year slip for IOC, maybe a little bit more. But I think as the aircraft, this is an aircraft under development, and so it has under development. But I think the Joint Program Office has a good for getting it back on track, and I think we've already had a good plan for SLEPing and sustaining legacy aircraft, of course, forever. In the F-18, we decided that for the strike fall, we had somewhere under 100. That would be manageable. Right now, we're at 52, 34 aircraft, so we'll take the bulk of that risk. But we have a plan to SLEP, again, 150 of those Hornets that will take us out to the point where we can transition to JSF.
Yes, sir, and I'll add, we have a pretty comprehensive plan for keeping our legacy Hornets flying. We have a service life management plan where we actually use force gauges on the airplane to take actual data, and we fly them, so that we minimize the FLIA expended on those airframes, and we can manage their FLIA expenditure down at the squadron level. We've done a service life analysis program on the legacy Hornets so that we know where we have to look for the spots we have to do modifications and repairs. And then we're in the second phase. We're in the midst of the second phase of our SLEP for the legacy Hornets. So we have a pretty comprehensive plan that we're most of the way through. We have the third phase of our SLEP to do, and we've identified the first 150 of those jets that we can tee up, and we start to SLEP those planes this year. So we have a program in place to extend the legacy Hornets to mitigate some of the ramifications of the JSF sliding for a couple of years. And
sir, just to reiterate some of the earlier comments, you'll hear an announcement fairly quickly from the United States Air Force that we're going to SLEP and avionics modernize probably in the vicinity of 300 to 350 F-16s, legacy F-16s, to get them both avionic capability-wise as well as structurally-wise with the SLEP to cover any shortfalls we'll have, and we think that's the right number. We have enough of the late model F-16s, Block 40s and 50s, to go as high as 600. We don't believe we'll need to go there with respect to SLEP. We are doing that full-scale fatigue testing on the F-16s and the F-15s to determine the structural life of those airplanes. And again, the avionics is part of the RDT&E in the FY12 budget. And I'll same position with our IOCs will all probably slip about 2 years to the right. And the Air Force in the first look thinks ours is going to be about the same, but sure, I'll tell you that airplane it's going to be a great airplane, and we got work to do, but it's going to be a good airplane, and we have to have it.
Ms. Hartzler is next. I thought Mr. Platt. Mr. Platt. Mr. Platt.
Mr. Chairman, I have no questions. Just express my thanks to each of our witnesses for their service, job you and your staffs are doing, and yield back to the Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Hartzler.
Thank you all for your service, and I especially want to commend General Lindell and General Carlisle. I think the Air Force Academy has got to be very proud of both of you. So thank you for your service. Questions about remotely piloted aircraft. Of course, I represent Whiteman Air Force Base and feel very honored about that. We have the 20th Reconnaissance Squadron there, and I think that the remotely piloted aircraft is really very critical to what we are doing to defend our country right now. And of course, its use is increasing as we monitor what's going on and protect our men and women in uniform and target enemies. And I know that in fiscal year 10, there was a capacity of 50 sustained combat air patrols, and then that has gone up now to 60. That we are doing. And I was on a radio interview last week and was asked a question, and I wonder if you could comment on it because I was not aware of it. But the caller said that they had read that Congress had passed additional funding for aircraft, but yet we don't have the pilots to fly them. Can you shed some light on that? Is that the case?
Yes. We have, if you see the growth of the combat air patrols that the MQ-1s and MQ-9s are flying, that ramp, we've exceeded what we were planning on doing every year. We're in our 6th surge to provide that capability to the combatant commanders. We had 3 in Libya recently. Those were surge. There's other parts of the world where we're standing them up at a rapid pace. In fact, our training the sensor operators and the pilots. We've been and we're taking those instructor pilots that are supposed to be training the next group of folks, and we're putting them into combat missions because we simply are continuing trying to provide the combatant commanders what they're asking for with respect to ISR. So that is in fact true. We are at the top limit. As a matter of fact, we've grown to 60 caps, and we're probably going to come down a few caps in the not too distant future to allow us to reconstitute some of our training capacity to start training the next round of folks who are going to do this mission. So that, in fact, is true.
Isn't it true that this is the fastest growing area of pilots right now, is training for the remotely piloted aircraft versus the other?
It is the largest single group of pilots in the United States Air Force are the RPA pilots. That is a true statement. Yes, ma'am.
When do you anticipate that we'll be able to meet capacity and to meet our needs?
Plan that'll take us about a year to get the training capacity and the advanced tactics, techniques, and procedures in the weapons school. We had to stand down to do the caps for the combatant commanders. We anticipate to force, and about next year at this time we'll be on a glide path to get back to the capacity that we're looking to get to, which will eventually be 65 caps.
That's certainly an interesting phenomenon that we're seeing here in that. As it relates to airspace, I understand that during Hurricane Katrina and meeting other federal requirements, there was difficulty gaining FAA approval for piloted vehicle operations in U.S. airspace. So what is the status of remotely piloted aircraft being able to operate independently in U.S. airspace?
That's still very diligently with the FAA and the National Airspace structure. There is an initiative by the United States Air Force and the Army to build a ground-based sense and avoid. Clearly, without a pilot in the airplane, the ability to see and avoid traffic is the biggest issue that the FAA has with RPAs. So if we're able to, we're very close to getting to the point that we won't have to have chase or observers, but in fact we'll have a ground-based sense and avoid. And what that existing air traffic control radars to monitor and do kind of the sense and avoid for the RPAs. We're not there yet.
You would think that would be fairly easy to solve with all the radar and the technology that we have today.
It is, ma'am, but it's crowded airspace.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a lot out there. So, you know, and we have very good relationship with the FAA. We're working very hard to move our way forward I understand their concerns, and we have to get to a point where we all feel good with whatever risk is out there.
And can you tell me if we are using remotely piloted aircraft to monitor our southern border with Mexico or not?
Ma'am, remotely piloted aircraft are being used by a lot more folks than just the United States military. They're being used by police departments. They're being used by Border Patrol. They're being used in many places. Yes, ma'am.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Runyon.
Gentlemen, thank you again for your service. General Lindell, and go services, the delay in the Joint Strike Fighter, and specifically in the SLEP program, each service, how much is that really costing us?
Congressman, your question concerns the F-16 SLEP program?
Yes.
Right. In the 12 budget, we have $108 million in the program, in the 12 budget. However, the total program that we're estimating, as General Carlisle has commented on, is 300 aircraft. The total SLEP with structural modifications of 300 aircraft plus an avionics modification would be roughly $9.4 million per aircraft.
And further delays, but how far down the road does that get us before we have to consider doing it again?
Significant service life, and we're looking at the Block 50 and the Block 40 aircraft to extend the service life to at least 10,000 flight hours on those aircraft. So certified to 8,000 a day, going to 10,000, that would add roughly 8 years. So we're looking for capability through the next decade, which would be through 2030. So we expect some viability out of the F-16 fleet if we were going to spend that much money, obviously, to SLEP the aircraft.
Well, thank you very much. That's all I have, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reyes, you have another round of questions?
I'll take one more. This question concerns the U-2, and it's for General Carlisle. The Air Force began retiring the U-2 aircraft in 2006. Congress passed legislation delaying that action until the Secretary of Defense can certify to Congress that the capabilities provided by the U-2 aircraft no longer contribute to mitigating any gaps in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. Is there a replacement capability that can replicate the U-2, or is this a case much like the SR-71, where it provided an unmatched capability, but we just couldn't continue to afford its unique operational capability, and so we retired it. What are our plans in the Air Force for the U-2?
So retiring it in the near term, in accordance, obviously, with law, and as well as to do with respect to maintaining the capability. The global the RQ-4 will be the replacement. It is not there yet. The sensor suite is not there, and it cannot match what the U-2 does. And we're going to maintain. We do a transition plan, high altitude reconnaissance transition plan that talks about when the Global Hawk in future years will be able to serve that same target set with respect to intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to replace the U-2. We're not there yet, and that airplane is going to be maintained for a period of time. It is a very expensive airplane to fly, but we are balancing that with the need for that capability.
Do we have, at this point, any ideas how much longer before we have that transitional capability? And
so I think with the Block 4, we believe through 2014 or 2015 right now, and in that time frame, we believe the Global Hawk may be at the point that it can fill that mission set. Yes, sir.
Very good. Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Loviando.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, following up on what I was talking about before, sort of in the same vein, could you give us your best professional military opinion on whether or not the U.S.'s current industrial base and fighter production capacity have the ability to meet the Air Force's and the Air Guard's operational requirements for protection and continued overseas operations if the F-35 continues to slip to the right and we have to do something?
So, answer is yes. I do believe, in my personal opinion, I think that there is still a production line for F-18s, there's still a production line for F-16s, and there's still an F-15E production line. They're still producing airplanes. In the near term, those are going to be, they're still part of the industrial base that are making great airplanes and still provide a great capability. I think the F-35, as I mentioned earlier, we have to have that airplane and we have to have that program. I think that as we continue 35 and we continue to fill that need in that industrial base, but in the current situation, we have production lines available to produce airplanes, and I believe the F-35 is going to be a great airplane, and I think it's making progress.
Well, we all hope for that, and there's no doubt about it. It's an unbelievable plane. However, if you're sitting on this side and we've listened to all the projections over a number of years now, and going back to General Jumper's presentations, you've got to have a little bit of a step back and a pause about where we go if the projections and the predictions are not correct. And I think that we don't want to be in a risk situation with only one production line if we can't see some clear progress here. Is that correct?
So I see progress in the F-35 program. I think, and I believe that airplane will deliver. I truly believe that. I don't. Again, the industrial base, I fully concur with. It's something that we need to be concerned about. We also need to work within the total obligation authority that we have within the Department of Defense. I believe that the F-35 program is going to deliver.
Okay. We obviously will watch that very carefully. Given Mr. Kritz's questions on the HH-60s and the UH-1NS, could with specific data in the coming weeks on the age, condition, and performance of those airframes through November of this year? Would that be possible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Kritz. No further questions? Mr. Platts? Ms. Hartzler? Mr. Runyon? He's gone. All right. Thank you for attending. I've been watching my question list and marking off those asked by other members, and I think, Carlisle, for each of the services, which aircraft in the operational forces or in the development phase have electromagnetic pulse protection?
That would be a classified response.
Hardened may be classified, but when had hardened, they were not. That really is not classified, is it?
I believe that it is, sir, but I would take that back. I can get you that answer.
Yeah, I think that whether you've hardened them or not is classified. The level to which you've hardened may be. If you'll take that for the record, I would be very pleased with that. Okay, we have the same question for the three of you relative to the F-35 program. Is it hardened? And we may have to have a classified session to discuss this, but I am concerned that it be hardened, not only hardened, but hardened to an appropriate level so that they will still be available to us after a robust EMP laydown by a peer or near peer. For many of the adversaries that we may face in the future, we don't really need these planes. We can do with lesser capable planes. When we really will need them is when we're here, and it's in all literature. It's in all games. One of the early things is a robust EMP laydown, which will deny us the use of all of our equipment, which is not adequately hardened. So we're very happy that they be hardened, but they be hardened to an appropriate level. See, I had another question relative to the EMP, and I guess I'll take that for the record. Too, we understand that in August 2011 interim report from the Defense Science Board on the survival assets to electromagnetic pulse and other nuclear weapons effects, the Air Force non-concurred with the new EMP standard, MIL Standard 3023, and that there are potential impacts on survivability requirements for new aircraft such as the F-35, the tanker, the next generation bomber, and the White House platforms. Could you tell us, and I guess you ought to do this for the record, please tell us why the Air Force non-concurred, with what did the Air Force non-concur, and why the Air Force non-concurred, if you could do that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we'll take it for the record and get that back to you.
Thank you. Admiral Floyd, and given the recent effect of Control Act of 2011, do you anticipate that you will decrease the total number of JSF bought from the current program of record of 680 aircraft total? If so, how will this affect the Navy and Marine Corps being able to meet strike fighter in the future?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, the answer to that is no. We still intend to procure 680 aircraft.
Thank you. General experienced a significant delay in its SDD program and a delay projections for initial occupational capability of the F-35B.
Mr. Chairman, I'm anticipating its event driven to be 2 years later, late 2014, and that may go into 2015.
Admiral Skinner, when does the Navy plan for the IOC and the F-35C?
Mr. Chairman, the Navy defines IOC as 10 ORD-compliant Block 3 aircraft ready to deploy that have completed initial operational test and evaluation. We're awaiting the results of the technical baseline review that will inform the integrated master schedule. That should be with us towards the end of this calendar year, and at that point in time, when we get a real clear idea about the test and evaluation schedule, we'll be able to define when that IOC will be.
Thank you very much. General Carlisle, when does the Air Force plan to be IOC in the F-35A?
Mr. Chairman, just as the other services, it is event-driven. It'll be dependent upon the IOT for a Block 3 airplane to be completed, and air crews trained, maintainers trained, and a sustainable deployment capability with those airplanes. That will be probably approximately a 2-year slip. We'll have better fidelity when we've seen the master schedule. It currently is 2016. We anticipate that'll slip till it's currently 2016. We think that'll slip till 2018.
And again, General Carlisle, recent news suggests a difference between Dr. Gilmore, the Director of Operational Testing, and the F-35 Joint Program Office about the readiness of the Eglin Air Force Base F-35 that would generate a capability to train F-35 pilots. We understand that the Undersecretary of Defense has asked the Air Force to review Dr. Gilmore's concerns. Does the Air Force view Dr. Gilmore's concerns, and does the Air Force plan to proceed with the OUE soon?
Question. Obviously we take the concerns of Dr. Gilmore very seriously. Both Air Force and Aeronautical Systems Command, Lieutenant General Tom Owens, as well as Admiral Van Lett, have talked to Dr. Gilmore. We are in the process of going through all his concerns. I think very recently, in the last couple of days, we've brought him more information. It again is, we have a very diligent and deliberate process to do military flight release and airworthiness certificate. We are going steps. We have not completed them yet, and we are demonstrating those to Dr. Gilmore. We believe that we'll be able to do that and satisfy all his concerns. For Correctness also, there are 6 airplanes at Eglin today, 6 F-35s down at Eglin today. Last week, 2 more were delivered. And we'll be able to do a military fight release at some point in the not too distant future, but again, it is event driven, and we are going through that process very deliberately, and we are addressing all of Dr. Gilmore's concerns.
Thank you. General Lindell, we understand that negotiations for F-35 Lot 5 contract are still ongoing, and a major point of contention between the government and the contractor is the issue of who will pay for changes to the aircraft due to concurrency. Is this correct?
Mr. Chairman, you are correct, and the issue is concurrency in the LRIP 5 contract and the amount of government liability versus contractor cost for concurrency.
Can you tell me, will Lot 5 contract negotiations probably be completed?
Yes, sir. We plan to definitize the contract for LRIP 5 this spring, and next spring in 2012.
And another question for General Lindell. Please describe the updated acquisition strategy for the Light Attack Armed Reconnaissance Aircraft, the LAR aircraft. Has the acquisition strategy been fully approved and finalized for this program?
Mr. Chairman, for LAR, Light Aircraft Armed Reconnaissance, the acquisition strategy has not been fully approved at this time. It is on hold. Obviously, the LAR program is a new start in the 12 budget, and we're awaiting the budget before we progress and coordinate the acquisition strategy for LAR.
And a question for General Carlisle relative to LAR. In the light of the recent Senate Armed Services Committee and Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense marks that would not provide funds for LAR in fiscal year 2012, is the Air Force reconsidering its requirement for LAR?
I think, as was stated here many times, given the budget constraints that we're under, we're looking at everything, and LAR is certainly no exception. We're looking at every program in the future, and as our top line goes down, we're looking at all those, and LAR is one of the ones that's being looked at, as well as every other program in the Air Force.
Mr. Reyes, Mr. Kritzer, either of you have additional questions? Thank you very much. Viewed the hearing today, the questions and the answers, there may be a need to ask additional questions for the record. We trust that you will be ready and able to answer those. Well, thank you very much for your testimony today. General, thank you very much for your long years of service. All the best in retirement.
Well, thank you. It's been a great honor and a great pleasure to serve our nation and our United States Air Force, and alongside my peers. If I had to do it all over again, I certainly would. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.